This is G. Graves. We've got a couple of minutes here for people to sign on, so I think we're ready to get started. Appreciate everybody who is on the line listening to the webinar. Hopefully we'll provide some information today that will be beneficial to everybody. Want to remind you, if you have any questions, you can fill those in the comments question box, and we will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. Let's get started here. Okay, here we go. These are some of the areas that we're going to be covering today. I'm going to give you an overview of the United Shippers Alliance. Then we'll talk about the current health of the ocean industry, which isn't good. Then we'll talk about some major trends that are going on in the ocean industry, factors that impact ocean pricing, and then we'll finish off with strategies and tactics to reduce ocean freight costs. The United Shippers Alliance overview. We are basically a shipper association that leverages the volumes of our members into master contracts and using that leverage and clout to negotiate pricing that generally a company cannot get on their own. So that's the basic function that we do. We are considered a rate negotiator shipper association and not a full service one that does all of the paperwork. We have two major programs. One is our ocean program, and the other is our domestic less than truckload program. Today we'll be talking about the ocean side, and there's a list of some of our ocean partner carriers. The United Shippers Alliance is a membership organization. We have general commodities, so it's not a lot of shipper associations are single commodity driven. One with toys, I know one with wood, one with wine and spirits. So we are a general commodity shipper association with a varied list of products there, from raw materials all the way to some finished goods. We do have close to 140 members across the United States, and even have a couple in Canada, and our aggregate spend is way over $100 million a year. Now let's go discuss the current health of the ocean industry. As I kind of hinted, it's not very good. Looking at this first chart, and I point out a couple of things, and this is through 2011. It doesn't have the 2012 numbers, which are not much different than 2011. If you look at the world percentage of growth, 2010, imports and exports both were at 14% growth. 2011, it dropped to 5% worldwide. Projections for 2013 that I've seen are still in that same range, between 4 and 5% growth, which is certainly not very much. The United States, or North America, if you look at that, the growth in 2010 was 15.5, and it dropped to a 7% growth in 2011 on the export side. Even bigger drop from 15 to 4% on the import side. There is a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Again, the economy could pick up, and all of a sudden these switch around, but right now it doesn't look like it's going to be much different than it was in 2012. Some people are projecting significant growth in 2014. Also want to point out down in Europe, if you would look at the Europe imports were 10% growth in 2010, and it dropped to 2.5%. We all know what's happening in Europe right now, so we don't see any major changes going on. In fact, it could get even worse. Next slide talks about the irrational asset decisions that's made by the ocean carriers. And part of that is that it's a long lead time to get vessels in. So when they order a vessel, it will be several years before that vessel's delivered. So they're trying to project out into the future what growth will be, and what the capacity of the ocean carriers will be. If you look at the 6.5% growth in the container capacity in 2012, and then you look on the other side of the balance, which is down, which shows that there was only 4.3% growth in container volume in 2012. Supply and demand, right off the bat, you can see there was more supply than there was demand. 2013 is going to look even worse. The projected capacities of the container growth could be as much as 11%. Some carriers are trying to defer delivery of their new larger vessels into the subsequent years, 2014, 2015. Also, the newest projections for the container volume growth is in that same range as it was last year. It's going to be somewhere between 4 and 5%. The next chart, a little bit busy, but a couple of points I want to show here is the liner return on the capital that they spend compared to a number of other different industries that are out there, way up above the break-even mark. If you look at the liner shipping side, which is the bottom line there, even in the best year, 2000, it was only 11%. And in 2008, and actually subsequent to that time, it's been in the negative territory. So carriers are realistic. They know it won't get back to 11%, but they would like to get back to that 4 to 6% return rate that they had in the mid 2000s. So for the last 5 years, if you look at what's happened in the ocean industry, the excess capacity, they had more space on ships than they needed. High debt, the cost of the ships is very, very expensive, even though lately the cost of money has been down. And market instability. You have to look at not only here, but into Europe to really see what's happening in the world markets. So all of that means that there were depressed rates, they had low margins, and they had large operating costs. One ocean carrier executive put it this way: the container market is likely to see continued downward pressure on rates in 2013. I might add that also people are saying that it's going to be up in 2014. One ocean carrier reported that overall their rates increased only 1.9% during 2012. Going back to my days in college in the economics class, the first thing you learn is supply and demand. The carriers have no control over the demand, so they're trying to control the supply side. Carriers are doing this by idling ships, taking them completely out of service and just storing them up. They're also in the slow times. They're pulling some out to kind of keep the supply and demand going. They're scrapping older vessels, and they're going to what's called slow steaming, which, if you know, like an automobile, if you're driving 70 miles an hour, your gas mileage is less than if you're driving 50 or 55. So that's what they're doing. They're actually operating the vessels at a slower speed, and what that does, it means that what would take 15 days to cross the Pacific Ocean now may take 17 or 18 days. So they will need more vessels to be used to make up for that lost time in the transit. But that also means that their costs are going to go down dramatically. 75% of the running cost of a ship on that leg from port to port is the cost of fuel. So anything they can do to reduce the cost of fuel is going to reduce their operating ratios. Carriers believe that they can control the capacity enough to support the higher rates that they're trying to secure this year to get back to black figures instead of red figures. On the other hand, shippers, and I'm one of them, I believe that the demand will not be enough to sustain the higher rates. One manager of a major chemical company put it this way: carriers need to understand that huge rate swings are not in our and should not be in their best interest. Rate stability is a big thing. We have members who do annual contracts where they'll buy or they'll sell for a 12-month contract, and so they need to have some stability of the pricing within that time frame. The last 2 years, particularly on the import side, we have not seen any kind of stability at all. In fact, from Asia to the U.S., we used to be, you put a price in and it was good, solid for 12 months. Then they went to where the cost of the bunker fuel, which is used to run the ships, was fluctuating so much that they did a fuel surcharge. And now they're starting to do general rate increases, peak season surcharges, and all of those kind of things to kind of cover the peaks and valleys of the shipping and at least bring some revenue into the ocean carriers. Major ocean industry trends. Trend number one is they're moving toward lean manufacturing, minimizing inventories, enforcing shippers to make smaller, more frequent shipments. The other, precision and predictability of transportation network delivery is an increasing competitive factor. Before, we would have members who would just ask for the price and they would be looking at the price. Now they're looking at price and the transit time. If it's 4 or 5 days longer and just a few $100s more, they'll take the shorter transit times because of the fact that they need to get the material in there quickly. Trend number three is extensions of supply chains around the globe, adding significant management complexity. Shipping internationally on the ocean side is a lot more complex. There's a lot more things that can go wrong. But companies are looking particularly to export more to any country that they can sell their products, since the domestic side is on a slow right now. Ocean carrier trends impacting the pricing. On the left, you'll see that the container lines are shifting to a new reality, and they're shifting to VLCS, which stands for very large container ships. That means any container ship that's over 8,000 TEUs. TEU is a 20-foot equivalent, so it's a half of a normal truck you see going down the highway. And by doing that, they're reducing their operating cost. If you divide the cost of the ship by the number of TEUs or containers on that ship, you can see where that would reduce the cost if you're going from a 5,000 TEU ship to a 10,000 TEU ship, for example. They're also increasing the importance of hub and spoke networks. A lot of carriers are setting up hub situations in the Caribbean, where they're bringing it into the Caribbean and then taking the containers off and delivering to the U.S., delivering to Central America, South America, as opposed to ships coming straight into the U.S. The concentration of container lines continues. The low rates, the low ROIs, and the high capital investments are forcing the carriers to create alliances and to pursue mergers. Three that's in talking or rumor stage right now. One good possibility is the combining, merging of Hamburg Süd and Hapag-Lloyd. Both of those are German carriers. Hamburg Süd's, of course, owned by a large portion by the city of Hamburg. They were in strong negotiations for a while, but that now has been pushed back, and more likely there won't be any kind of merger with those two carriers until about 2015, at least from the latest information that's out there. The other two that are really rumors are the two Chinese carriers, COSCO and China Shipping. Both are hurting on revenue, and they're losing money, so there is talk about combining those. We'll see if that ever happens. The other is the merger of three of the Japanese carriers, K-Line, NYK, and Mitsui OSK. In discussion with those carriers, that is highly unlikely, even though they're all Japanese carriers. They all have their own internal business structures, and it doesn't look like there's really a good match for them. Plus, one of the carriers is losing a large amount of money, and the other two don't want to take on that. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see overcapacity continues to increase. In the next 3 years, more than 100 new very large container ships will go into operation. In fact, 40 of those that are 10,000 TEUs or more are scheduled to come in this year, 2013, and there are 5 that are at 18,000 TEUs. 19 of the top 21 global carriers are taking delivery of the very large vessels. Next item on there, just below that, ports facilities investments are not keeping pace. The U.S. ports can't handle the larger ships. Excuse me. Those are going into Europe, which has the deep water ports. Basically, the U.S. ports don't have enough draft. They don't have enough deep water to service the large ships, and it's very costly to do the dredging, even though some ports, like the Port of New York, are doing some of that dredging. The Panama Canal is limiting the amount of TEU vessels, size of TEU vessels that could go through that facility. Currently, it is at 5,000 TEUs, so you can see a 10,000 or 18,000 TEU vessel can't go through. There is an expansion of the Panama Canal that right now looks to also be completed in 2015. That will open up a lot of opportunities for the larger ships to serve the east coast of the U.S. Other developments that are impacting the ocean industry, the supply chain management focus across the transportation network of partners. When you look at a domestic shipment, you're probably looking at one carrier that picks it up and the same carrier delivers it. At most, you might have two carriers on an interline haul for an LTL, for example. When you're looking at the international, there's a lot of people involved in the chain. If you even look at moving from Columbus to Hong Kong, you'll have a truck line, a drayman, pick up the container, deliver and pick up the container at your facility, take it back to the rail ramp. Then you've got the railroad that will deliver it to the West Coast. Then you've got transfer going on at the Port of Los Angeles, for example. Then you have companies that pick it up, set it on the ship. You have the ocean carrier taking over. You have another company at the destination port. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the system. So by having that long chain of companies involved in the international, it makes it much more complicated. Technology advancements in data capture and e-commerce, more visibility equals more knowledge equals better decision making. So we're all going through that. The days of somebody sitting in a corner and making decisions based upon gut feel and experience is gone now. We have a lot of tools, electronic tools that we can use to make assessments and do our measurements. The next one on the right-hand side, the increased number of market and trade initiatives. Like I said earlier, companies are looking to export wherever they can. And also we're seeing situations that are causing companies in the U.S. to close. I spoke at a convention of another association some time ago, and they were complaining that the EPA was causing some of their suppliers to close down, and there was no other suppliers of that product in the U.S., so they were forced to buy internationally and import it instead of buying U.S. The bottom is expanded regulatory monitoring and penalty issues. One thing that's happened in the steamship line industry is the requirement that low sulfur diesel fuel be used whenever they get close to shore to cut down on pollution. That low sulfur diesel fuel is much more expensive, therefore it leads to higher costs for the international transportation. The bottom on the right, increased development of transportation corridors and inland ports. Here in Columbus, we're setting with the Heartland Corridor that comes up from Norfolk to Columbus. That's a 2-day delivery, much quicker than off the West Coast if it's coming into Los Angeles or the Pacific Northwest or even the Canadian ports of entry. That plan is for that corridor to be expanded and reach all the way out up to the Chicago area. Factors impacting ocean transportation pricing. We've got this one chart here, which I think is really good. It's showing the East Coast and West Coast. If you look on the left-hand side, it's starting with a base of 100 per FEU, which is a 40-foot equivalent, which would be the size of a U.S. truck. Being our base, that's from January, excuse me, of 2008. And if you follow that line along into August of 2011, you'll see that it's way below 100, getting down, give or take, 80, 82. So the revenue, it continues to drop. In 2012, we saw the same kind of low numbers, even though there was a slight pickup. Carriers are pushing 2013 pricing to get back to some acceptable levels, at least back to that 100 level that they had in 2008. if you remember from an earlier slide, they want to get back to at least that 4 to 6% return on capital. Major factors impacting the base rate. Obviously, the origin and destination, where you're starting from. Here in the Midwest, we're quite a ways from the water, so we have a large inland factor to get our activity to the east coast or the west coast. Primarily, that is done by rail. So factors that would impact that would be whether you rail it or whether you truck it. Of course, trucking is quicker, higher cost. If you're going around the circle to the left, container size, basically we have 20-foot containers, 40-foot containers, 40-foot high cubes, which are taller and can generally is used for products that don't weigh as much, and then also the 45-foot containers. Big factor, of course, is the fuel's cost, whether it's the domestic leg or the international leg. Ocean bunker fuel has doubled in price since 2006. Again, if you remember, that was 75% of the running cost of a ship. It's not sold by gallons or barrels, but it's actually sold by weight and metric ton. Bunker fuel is the bottom of the oil barrel. Once they take out all the good stuff, there is a sludge left at the bottom, and that's what's bunker fuel. That is so thick that it has to be heated by steam before it can even be used by the steamship lines. The next one on the chart there is the terminal fees. Port improvement cost. We talked about having to dredge and improve the ports in the U.S. And there are not a lot of government funds available to do that. So any port improvement costs are passed on to the vessel, which means they're passed on to the consumer. It's interesting that Panama Canal now can only do small ships. But they've just increased their tolls, excuse me, from $250,000 per passage to $450,000. So that extra $200,000 is passed on, divided off by per container. So we're seeing increases in the Panama Canal surcharge. Penalties, there's an extra fee if you have an overweight container. You use a triaxle to handle that on a 20-foot container. It's an extra fee if you have hazardous material. There's an extra fee if you hold the container too long at the port or at your facility. Currency rates, the swing in the U.S. dollar value affects the vessel cost, so therefore those currency swings are affected in the base rate of the pricing. Season, particularly the Asia to U.S. market, the peak season generally runs from July to October. And last year the carriers, for one of the few times, actually held together, and we ended up doing a peak season, which we would normally have been able to get out of to mitigate and negotiate away. So there's a lot of those kind of factors that go into the base rate price of your ocean shipments. It's more than just the base rate to negotiate. We talked about the bunker. We talked about the currency, which is a pass-through, the IMO surcharge, which is a hazardous material, the terminal handling charges, origin and destination, those are generally pass-throughs. General rate increases, when carriers want to get additional revenue or they're losing money, they propose, and you negotiate on a general rate increase. You can either end up paying the full charge, you can mitigate it down to a lesser fee, or you can get it waived. Obviously, the first choice is to get it waived. Sometimes market conditions dictate that you do take a mitigated general rate increase. Rarely do we ever take the full general rate increase. ISPS, so the security charges, those are all pass-throughs. Port congestion surcharge is kind of a new one that's popped up. That we've seen in a couple of places just recently when the East Coast and the Gulf Coast ILA looked like it was going on strike. The carriers announced a $1,000 per 40-foot container port congestion surcharge because of all the backup that they were anticipating on the West Coast, and then all the backup once the ports opened up. Fortunately, that didn't happen, and that fee never was assessed. There is, in certain countries that get jammed up, right now there is a peak season surcharge, a port congestion surcharge that's in effect for the country of Venezuela with all that's going on down there. Peak season surcharge, again, that's generally July to October, and it applied only for the Asia to U.S. market for us. Last year we saw January a peak season surcharge just prior to the Chinese New Year because there was a peak in shipping at that. And now we're even seeing other countries such as Brazil that's having some peak season surcharge. And the last on this slide is the heavyweight charge. For example, on a 20-foot dry van, you have triaxles, which has more wheels under the chassis, but that could add $200 to $375 to the base rate. There's also limited availability of triaxles, and you do get an increase in weight from approximately 38,500 pounds up to about 44,000 pounds. Ocean conferences and agreements, basically the ocean conferences used to have major control. They could dictate pricing. That's changed dramatically over the last few years. And the bottom line there, that's the members of the association's agreements, they take independent action, and that's where we do our negotiations. For example, the Trans-Pacific Stabilization Agreement, which has a large number of the Asia to U.S. carriers belong to that organization. They put out pricing guidelines, big guidelines for this year, big increases in the base rate. They do general rate increases, recommendations. They do peak season recommendations, and they do the fuel surcharges, which most of the carriers go along with. The good part is that you can negotiate with the carriers. Everything's negotiable. And you try to minimize and keep everything into as stable a pricing as you can. Now this slide kind of shows the same thing where with conference carriers, rates are recommended by the conference and all the other surcharges are, but you can negotiate independently on that. Right now, we're in the midst of our Asia to U.S. import negotiations. I'll be in Chicago next week negotiating with 8 of our ocean carriers on our Asian import pricing. Next slide, you can see the baseline in the red line, and then you have the little green snake going along, which is kind of staying on the same baseline. That's from January of 2011 through February of 2012. The baseline is $1,000, and it's pretty much staying on to that. The March 8, 2013 report was $1,073, which was down 4% from the prior week. So pricing is going down right now. Strategies and tactics to reduce your transportation costs. Negotiation considerations. First of all, you got to decide what you want. There's always a price-service trade-off. The higher the service levels, generally the higher the price you pay. So you need to define exactly what you need. I have one member that we work with that imports a very low-value product. For them, it's strictly price. If it takes 2 weeks or even 3 weeks longer to get here, that doesn't bother them because their product is such low value. We have other members who have high-value products, and they're willing to pay extra to knock off a few days. Transit times, again, as we mentioned earlier, is becoming an important question people are asking. We have options from Asia right now. You could always do the West Coast, but now you have the Panama Canal option to the East Coast and the Suez Canal option to the East Coast. Volume commitments, if you're doing it individually, then you're trying to negotiate on your volumes and the percentage of business that you give to a particular carrier. If you're part of a large company, you're combining all of your activity from multiple locations into your price negotiations, and the United Shippers Alliance, of course, takes that one step further, where we take the volumes of multiple companies and put them together to do our negotiations. And that generally can secure better pricing than any individual, particularly small or middle-sized company, can get. Most favored nation, and that's kind of hard to do anymore with the negotiations with the carriers. That means that any similarly situated customer, shipper, importer that is out there, if they get a better rate, then you get the carriers to also pass that rate on to you. And that's becoming more and more difficult to do in these times. Competitive offers, you know, we adjust our pricing during contracts, the contract time frame all the time. I would say for the bulk of our contracts, we actually make amendments, either adjusting the pricing or adding and subtracting lanes every week. Incentives and penalties. Basically, what you're looking at is that pricing is an important factor, but that's not the only factor. I have members who will pay a few $100s extra per container simply because the documentation, the ease of booking, the ease of handling any operational issues, the correct billing, all of those kind of issues means more to them than using the lowest price carrier out there. Metrics, you got to measure everything. So you know the old statement, I can't manage what I can't measure. Contractual construction, and we do this. We use the boilerplate contracts of all the carriers are basically the same. So we go along with that, rather than do our own and go through all the legal issues going along with that. Information requirements, you need to keep your freight forwarder on the export side, your customs broker on the import side involved in what's going on. They're the ones who can help you a lot to solve those issues. Security concerns. Right now, for exports, you need to deliver your containers at least 24 hours prior to the ship so that they can do all the checking and inspections and those kind of things. On the import side, you need to get into customs compliance, and you can get on the list of approved importers, and that will minimize any delays or any inspections that they will do. Confidentiality clause, we have that in all of our contracts. The negotiate liability, that's becoming more and more difficult to do. The carriers are not negotiating away their liability right now. And we also do contracts for multiple years, but at the same time we do an annual price negotiations. Add-ons, service considerations, enhanced or different land-based services. You have options. You can do East Coast, West Coast. You can do door rates. You can do rail ramp rates. You can do port rates. So whatever, you need to look at all the options and which meets your price service trade-offs. IT services, to the extent possible, you need to use the carrier's web-based programs. That will be advantageous to you. Carriers are also charging extra now if you don't use their electronic web-based programs. Different payment terms. Imports, ocean carriers need to get paid before they'll deliver. Holding onto that container is the leverage that they have. Through some third parties, you can negotiate some longer payment terms. Export, you can negotiate payment terms. Generally, carriers don't want to go beyond 30 days. Moving to the left, equipment availability. This can be an issue now. It used to not be an issue, and mainly because there are not enough imports to keep the containers available all around the United States. So sometimes during peak seasons, it's going to be very difficult to find containers. That's why what we do is we set up at least 2 or 3 different carriers as options, and that way if one carrier is not available, that you can have something from others. A big item that's popped up is the ocean carriers are no longer providing chassis underneath the containers at the rail ramp for any shipments delivered there. And they are pushing for a chassis usage charge on any door rates. Moving back up to the center circle, Transit time, as we talked about earlier, is very important. One more circle up, the guaranteed space. For us, it's guaranteed on volume, so whatever our minimum volume commitment is in our contracts, divide that by 52, and that's the commitments that we have for guaranteed service. That doesn't mean that there's ever going to be an issue. In fact, we very rarely have an issue with guaranteed space, even on import side. Moving over to the upper right circle, specialized equipment, triaxles we talked about, open tops, refrigerated vans, although that equipment is available. Going down, extended free time, that is negotiable both on imports and exports in the U.S. and outside the U.S. And the last is the enhanced security. The carriers, particularly since 9/11, have really tightened up on the enhanced security levels that are out there. How can you level the playing field if you're not a mega shipper? Well, that's United Shippers Alliance. That's one of the things that we do. You can as we discussed, if you're a large company, you can leverage all your business units and then secure pricing off of that. And again, you can move to the shipper association that does their volume purchasing. Moving around to the right, only ask for the services you need and the service levels you require. Sometimes people feel that they need to have quick deliveries when actually if they would do the analysis, they would not need to do that. And then moving around to the bottom rectangle, look at other equipment and port options. That's where we talk about, you know, do I need a 20? Do I need a 40? Those kind of deals. Or you look at, do I even need to do it as a full container? Can I do it as a less than container shipment and still make the service deliveries that I need? Port options, you have lots of port options now. Like we discussed, the Heartland Corridor has really opened up the East Coast, particularly here in the Midwest, so that becomes an option. So quite often we will end up putting pricing in from Midwest locations by the East Coast as well as by the West Coast. And then the last rectangle is one that's there for us, and that is that combined volumes with other shippers and importers through a shipper association. So that's pretty much what we have here, and thank you for your time on all going through this. We do have a couple of questions that I've got here that we'll read and answer. One question is, what do you think the increase will be on the Asian imports? Carriers are pushing for gigantic increases, $600, $800 to inland locations, and those they know they're not going to get it. But I think that we are looking at probably somewhere between $100 and $200 on a 40-foot container, and then the other sizes, there's a formula to decide the increase on other sizes of boxes. So my guess is that we're looking at somewhere around that $100, $200 per container increase. Some lanes will actually be the same or go down depending on how the carriers are wanting to pursue pricing for a particular lane. The other question that we have is, do you see any ocean carriers going out of business? Those talks keep coming up all the time, and there are a couple of carriers out there that are, I think, on the bubble. And if the situation doesn't improve over the next year or two, I think we will see some carriers go out. Over the past couple of years, there have been several small carriers that tried to be niche players that have gone out of business. But for the most part, I think we're looking at getting bigger, and that means more mergers in lieu of anybody going out of business. That's all we have. I appreciate everybody being on the webinar. Hopefully we provided some information today that's beneficial to you and your organization.